Hi, we're in the midst of a three-part series called Time Well Spent, teaching on how to live wisely and well. And today we're thinking about time wasting. Yes, how we waste time. So my title is the series title, but as a question. Time well spent? Is my time, is your time spent well? To start thinking about this, let's start at the end of life. And let me ask this question. What would you like said about you at your funeral eulogy? What would you like said about you at your funeral eulogy? Just this last year, my father passed away. And at the start of this year, we had his funeral service and Thanksgiving service. And during that time, there were many memories shared and many stories shared of a life that was well lived. In many ways, it wasn't a life full of accolades and medals and all that type of thing, but it was a life well lived because there were so many people there, so many people touched by his life and things that he'd said to them along the way. My dad used to love to talk. He was very, very generous in every way. Generous with his time, generous with his treasure, with his talent, with everything. He was always giving to people. And that was very evident at his funeral service. He lived life with a capital L for sure. What would you like said about you at your funeral eulogy? If you think about that and then work back from that place to where you are right now and ask yourself this question, I ask it of myself. How is who I am and how I am living today working towards that moment? How is who I am and how I am living today working towards that end? One of the key scriptures that we are anchoring this series in is a psalm written by Moses. It's Psalm 90 and it's verse 10 to 12. And in verse 12, in the Amplified version, it says it like this. So teach us to number our days that we may cultivate and bring to you a heart of wisdom. Moses was expressing a way of orientating time in a fresh way, where we think about the arc of our moments, of our years, of our days, of our minutes, and how they intersect with eternity. Not just now, but for eternity. If I was to paraphrase it, I think you could put it like this. Teach us that today is not just another day, but it's a day that the Lord has made. You see, when you live from that place, you live well. The context for Moses, of course, he grew up in Egypt in his formative years, and the Egyptians were very learned in all the sciences, including arithmetic. And I'm sure they would have loved to know the way to work out, how can we work out what the end of our lives looks like, when that date is. But I don't actually think that's what Moses was getting at. I think when Moses penned those words for each of us to read and to pray and to hear and to listen in, teach us to number our days that we might cultivate and bring to you a heart of wisdom. I think Moses was trying to emphasize our mortality. Teach us to number our days that we might gain a heart of wisdom. We need a heart of wisdom in order to spend time well and not waste of it. Not waste our time. Arthur Lake talked about this verse like this. Sin has divorced wisdom and the soul, yet they are not so severed that they might not be reunited. And nothing is more powerful in furthering this union than this feeling meditation that we are mortal. Moses approached life from a totally different perspective, a different foundation. And actually, I'd encourage you to take this psalm, Psalm chapter 90. In fact, it's the only psalm written by Moses in the book of Psalms. Take that psalm and maybe for a week, or maybe over the next few weeks as we're bringing these messages, take that psalm at the start of your day, find a few minutes in the start of your day and pray these words. Let the psalm speak for you. Moses had a fear for God, and he evidently understood his mortality. Let's stay there for a moment, because I think it helps us in understanding how not to waste time. It begins from a place of a fear for God and an understanding of our mortality. Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, in our other key scripture today, Ecclesiastes chapter 3, in verse 20, he said this: all came from the dust and all return to the dust. Sobering thought for each of us. His father, King David, penned these words in one of his Psalms, Psalm 39, verse 4, Lord, let me know life's end and to appreciate the extent of my days. Let me know how frail I am, how transient is my stay here. Behold, you have made my days as short as hand widths. You have made my days as short as hand widths, and my lifetime is as nothing in your sight. Surely every man at his best is a mere breath, a wisp of smoke, a vapor that vanishes. Now, before anyone sinks into a great depression during this moment, numbering our days wisely is actually not about death. That's not what Moses is getting at. It's about life and life now. It's living wisdom. It's living wisely now. Numbering our days, not wasting them. It's knowing who you are and whose you are. Because the fear of the Lord is the beginning of the path of wisdom to a life of wisdom. Teach us to number our days that we might cultivate and bring to you a heart of wisdom. That word cultivate, that suggests to me that we've got to work on it. And that's where we fall down. It's definitely where I fall down. There are days where I'm not cultivating. I'm just wasting. I'm just wasting my time. Perhaps the same for you. That's where we fall down. Time wasting. Let's be really honest. Who here has ever wasted time? If you're listening to this message today, there's a very good chance there's been a point in your life, if not often, where you waste time. We all do. Procrastinating, putting off till tomorrow what could be done today. That happened to me even this week. I planned to mow my lawn yesterday evening, and then I got to yesterday evening and thought, oh, no, I'll do it tomorrow. And so I procrastinated and I put it off, and I'll be doing it tonight. Putting off till tomorrow what can be done today. But then there's those moments that actually they don't feel good, do they? When you're wasting your time, but not only are you wasting your time, you're wasting the time of someone else. Time wasting. You've heard the phrase, oh, they're a bunch of time wasters. Well, that makes me think about football. I love football, love the Premier League. I'm a Liverpool fan. And about a month ago, it was the Merseyside derby. Liverpool versus Everton. Everton were fighting for their Premier League survival with every ounce of their being, trying to stay in the division. Liverpool were fighting to win the Premier League. Everton's game management was about time wasting, and they were brilliant at it, to be fair. They did really, really well for about 65 minutes. During that time, Jordan Pickford summed up their time wasting. He's their goalkeeper. He received the ball, and when he would catch the ball, he would bring it into himself, fall to his knees, fall to the grass, and waste as much time as possible, probably 30 seconds, or it felt like minutes to me, but it was probably 30 seconds of time wasting to try and game manage the game not to lose. Well, during the second half of that game, Liverpool finally broke through and scored. And then all of a sudden, for some reason, Everton didn't want to waste time anymore. I wonder why. But the irony was the Liverpool goalkeeper, Alisson, on one occasion during that time, received the ball. And when he received the ball, he held it to his chest, fell to his knees, fell to the grass. And it was not lost on everyone present, the funny side of that. Why don't you watch this moment?
Matip. Pickford gathers, and now Pickford goes down and smiles and winks.
He went down in stages, and Klopp is not enjoying this.
Richarlison. Fair contact, but not a problem for Alisson, who's having a laugh at Jordan Pickford's expense.
He is. He's mimicking the opposition goalkeeper with what he did in the first half at the same end.
Time wasting. We all do it. So just last year, towards the end of last year, I was thinking to myself, I want to spend more time reading. I just recognised I needed to invest more time. I was doing reading, but just not enough. Didn't feel like I was doing enough of it. So I thought about it for a few minutes, and the classic cliche came to mind. Andy, you've not got enough time. And actually, in some respects, I hadn't got enough time, because practically I thought about my time and it was full. But actually, some of the things that I was using my time for as I thought about it were actually a waste of time. One of those things was watching TV. I'd realised that I'd orientated my days, whereas if I was around at home towards the end of the day, I would often just sit in Dad's chair in front of the TV and watch something. So I thought to myself, well, let's just change that. Let's reorientate time. Let me use some of the time I would have used for watching telly and read some more. Nothing wrong with watching telly, but I'd recognised that was actually wasting time. So I started to read more. As a result, in the first part of this year, I think I've read more books today than I read in the whole of last year. And that was simply because I just made a decision to reorientate my day and my days and look at time, look at it carefully and see what I could let go of to bring something that was better for me into my life. When my son was little, I'd often come home from work, and when I got home, our front door opened straight into the lounge, and I'd walk into the lounge and it'd actually be very difficult to walk anywhere without breaking something, because he'd evidently all day long been playing with toys, and rather than putting things away, he'd just bring toy in after toy after toy, go and get another toy, and suddenly you've got a lounge full of toys. I walk in, he throws himself at me, comes into my arms and says, "Daddy, I want to play a game." I'm like, "That's great, son, what do you want to play?" And he'd invariably say something that wasn't even in the room. So the first thing we would have to do, and I would have to say to him, is, "Son, we need to pack up some of these toys and clear some space so that we can play our game." This would happen day after day after day. And then one day, I just remember coming home one day and doing this, and it was like a lightning moment. It was just like a light bulb went off in my head, and I thought to myself, hold on, is this how God feels with us sometimes? We so fill our time, so fill our space with stuff. It's not all bad, but we just fill it with stuff that actually he's got no room. And actually, maybe just like I needed to do with my son, I've got to create some space in order for God to fill it. Stop wasting time in some things in order for God to fill that time with his purpose. One of the books that I've read over the last few months was a book called Transitions. Talks a lot about time. And in that book, there was an interesting story about a man who stopped smoking. I thought I'd read it to you. The man said, "Where did all the extra time come from?" he asked half seriously. I must have used up hours and hours smoking. And of course, that's true to some extent. But the changed time sense also comes from the ending of a familiar way of structuring time. The changed time sense also comes from the ending of a familiar way of structuring time. You know, over the last few years, we've reoriented time and space a lot, haven't we? Through COVID season that we've walked. And we find ourselves here in a new space, no back to normal, no real sense of that anymore, but in this new place, in this new space, in this new time. And it's not easy to orientate. It's not easy to find where we are. And a bit like this man who suddenly stopped doing something, there was a disorientation of space and time because he suddenly realized that time kind of spanned out in front of him and all of a sudden he'd got loads of time. I wonder what that looks like for you and looks like for me today. Perhaps there are habits or ways of living that we've got into that are just wasting. They're just wasting time. There's no sense of purpose to it. So, is there anything that you need to let go of to have time? Another way of asking would be, what is it time to let go of? In the first message in this series, Pastor Johnny talked about the difference between Chronos time and Kairos time. Chronos time being, the time of a clock or a calendar where we get our words chronology, chronicle, even chronic comes from that, which is interesting. Death by clock, maybe. Kairos, though, Kairos time is time as a gift. Think about time as a gift. Think about time as opportunity, time as season, time pregnant with purpose. In Kairos time, we don't ask, what time is it? But rather, what is this time for? Let me ask that of you and me today. What is this time for? Kairos is the servant of holy purpose in our lives. Our other key scripture today is Ecclesiastes chapter 3. And let me focus in on verse 3 and 11. It's entitled A Time for Everything. There is a season, a time appointed for everything, and a time for every delight and event or purpose under heaven. He has made everything beautiful and appropriate in its time. He has also planted eternity, a sense of divine purpose in the human heart. A mysterious longing which nothing under the sun can satisfy except God. C.S. Lewis put it like this: if I find in myself desires which nothing in this world can satisfy, the only logical explanation is that I was made for another world. It's God who brings the reality of life's season together for us. They come in His time, not ours. It's that intersecting of our moments and our days with eternity. God has planted eternity in the heart of man. So maybe our focus should be not on time itself, but on our purpose. Kairos time. About this time, 14 years ago, we were on our way to moving to America with my work, and the organisation I was working with at the time gave us a leaving do. It's a lovely evening, I remember it well, very honouring time. And towards the end of that evening, my colleague who I'd been working with for a number of years came up to me and gave me a gift. And I opened the gift, and it was a compass. It was a little silver compass. And I smiled because I knew what the gift meant, and I knew what my colleague and friend of many years was saying to me. He was saying, Andy, live your life by a compass. You see, when we live our lives by a compass and not by a clock, life becomes about direction. The direction that we are going in, the purpose of our lives, our direction towards God, our direction towards our heavenly home, our direction towards eternity. Numbering our days, not wasting them. Having said all of that, we might have to waste some time in order to understand Kairos time. I find it amazing that the first thing God made holy in our world on this earth was a day. It was 24 hours. I think I worked it out as 86,400 seconds. Not to do everything that we think is necessary for that day, but actually a day just to be, a day to rest, a day to stop doing everything that we think is necessary in order to embrace life. And I think Moses totally understood that. When he gave us that phrase, teach us to number our days that we might cultivate and bring to you a heart of wisdom. I think Moses understood that. He understood the moments, the days, the years of all of our days, the arc of all of that intersecting with eternity. Numbering our days, not wasting them. Our messages recently have all been on this theme of stewardship and how we steward our lives, from our money and our talents to our time. And I was in a conversation the other day and recognised that so much of this comes down to a heart posture for you and me. And it's a principle, it's a life principle. And the principle is generosity. It's not just actually about being generous with our money and generous with our talents, but it's about being generous with our time. Let me read to you how Mark Buchanan puts that, entitled The World of the Generous. The world of the generous gets larger and larger. The world of the stingy gets smaller and smaller, which is paraphrased from the Message translation of Proverbs 11, verse 24. It's more than just a financial principle, but it's a basic truth of life. Generous people generate things. Have you noticed how generous people seem to have more time? But I think this is like God's economy. This is the way God works. They give their time, and in giving away their time, somehow they have an abundance of it. They just have more. But they don't have any more minutes or days or hours than we do. It's just the same, but they seem to have an abundance of it. You know, they may be in a conversation which maybe feels like wasted time. You ever been in one of those? It might feel like wasted time, but actually in God's economy, you're giving time to that person. You're paying attention, you're giving your affection. There's a sense of giving of yourself, of your time. Contrary to that, those who guard every minute resent every interruption. They ration every moment, they never have enough, they're always late, always behind, always scrambling, always driven. And of course, there's a place for managing our time, living wisely and well. Yes, the management of time, but I do think we have to be careful in managing, and there's a fine line. We have to be careful that managing doesn't become rigid, because when management of our time becomes rigid time, it's almost like we can crush the life out of it. It's like if Kairos time is a flower, think of a flower budding and blossoming in your hand. And we just hold on to it so tightly, like sometimes we hold on to time so tightly that we actually crush the life out of it, when actually its purpose was to live and breathe and provide and to give generously of our time. You know, the Apostle Paul in his second letter to the Corinthians, he talked about the Macedonian people. And he got this little phrase, they gave themselves first to the Lord and then to us. You see, true generosity in our heart, whether it's time, talent, or treasure, true generosity is first to God and then to others. First to God and then to others. First the spirit, then the flesh. It always starts with giving. Actually not giving something, but actually giving ourselves. In the midst of this message, let's just pause for a moment. Even though time is moving on, we pause and rest for a moment. And let's take a moment in time to talk to God. Give yourself first to God. So let's do that. Stop now and give yourself, give your breath, your health, or your sickness, your thoughts, your intents, all of who you are, and give all your time. And Father, we acknowledge that every moment you give, that we receive, is a gift. Help us, Lord, not to turn time into possession. But we receive time as a gift. Help us to be willing to impart it as a gift. And we invite you, Lord, to direct our paths. Help us not to waste time, but lead us in the everlasting way. Amen. Give yourself first to God and then to others. And you'll most likely find that you've had more time than you've ever had. In God's economy, Kairos time is pregnant with purpose, numbering our days, not wasting them. And finally, the span between life as we intend it and life as we receive it, that's vast. And our true purpose actually is found in the gap. The numbering of our days is found in between life as we intend it and life as we receive it. I love the film Mr. Holland's Opus. It's the story of a man who had an incredible ambition. He wanted to be a great composer. But in his young life, when he got married, he realized he needed to pay the bills. So he thought, okay, I'll become a music teacher because that's my passion, that's my gifting, and then I can work on my opus. And then at some point when I've saved enough, I can just be working on it in my spare time and then step into my destiny. He had this grand idea of being this great composer. But then life interrupted. And 1 year became 2 years. And 2 years became 5 years. And 5 years became 10 years. And 10 years became 20 years. And 20 years became 40 years. And the school board had talked to Mr. Holland about taking retirement. And he accepted. And on his final day, he was packing up his office and putting everything into his box. You can imagine the moment. His important pictures off the wall, his memories, his achievements, his accolades. He put it all into a box. And his wife and now older son came to meet him at his office, and they walked away down the corridors of the school towards the entrance. And Mr. Holland just noticed for a moment. He said, well, what's that sound? I can hear something in the school hall. So they walked to the school hall and they opened the doors to a surprise. Many of the students over the 40 years, teachers, friends, family, had filled that school hall in order to honour him for his time in the school and his time in their lives. There was an orchestra, and the orchestra had spent time, much time, learning their instruments and learning Mr. Holland's opus, and they played it. And as he sat on that front row listening to his students from the past, listening and watching along with everyone around him, tears flowed as he realised that actually his opus wasn't the music composition, but it was the lives of everyone that had been in his life. It was all the people whose lives he had touched. They were his opus. And all of a sudden, Mr. Holland realised that he had numbered his days. He'd not wasted them. After all these years, he'd learned to number his days. Time well spent. Do I spend my time well? Think about the end of your life. Think about the end of my life. Think about that moment. How is who I am and how I'm living today working towards our Opus moment? Lord, teach us to number our days, that we might cultivate and bring to you a heart of wisdom. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for joining us for the message here at Renewal. We hope you've been inspired, encouraged and challenged by what you've heard, and that it will be of great purpose for you and others. This year we are celebrating Renewal's 50th Jubilee year, which is really exciting for us. To find out how you can get involved, why don't you go to renewalcc.com/50. Yes, that's the big 50. If you'd like to know more about what it means to be a Christian, then why not sign up for our Next Steps programme? Go to renewalcc.com/next steps, fill out the contact form, and one of our friendly team will be in touch. Don't worry, we won't spam you. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our online channels at YouTube, and also you can stay up to date by going to our Renewal podcast at renewalcc.com/media or searching on Spotify or Apple Podcast. Every Monday we'll release a new episode so you can stay right up to date. Finally, if you like the work we do here, you can donate to Renewal by going to renewalcc.com/give. All donations are gratefully received. Have a blessed week ahead, and we will see you soon.